Meninism is not real. It literally is just not a thing. It's not at all. So, Danielle, I just heard about an interesting documentary made by a woman named Cassie J. It's going to be showing on our city, but not everywhere, so we should try to see it. Oh, totally. Sounds cool. I'm always into female directors. Is she a feminist? Well, that's sort of the thing. The film is called The Red Pill, and it's about men's rights activists. And I guess when she started, she was a feminist, but as it went on, she had differing opinions. So it's a feminist film? Well, not exactly. It sounds like she ended up agreeing with the MRAs over the course of making the movie much more so than she thought she would. Wait, MRAs? Like the Meninists? Well, yeah, men's rights activists. But from what it sounds like, they actually make some really compelling points. I was listening to an interview with her on the Rubin Report. So they're Meninists. You're trying to get me to see a movie about Meninist scum made by some internalized misogynist woman who actually works with the patriarchy and pretends to agree with them? I am blocking you now. Nice to know you. If you ever try to contact me again, I will be classifying it as a form of internet harassment and reporting you to the authorities. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and that little straw man argument sounds rather ridiculous, and it is. Completely ridiculous, of course, but it is not really much of an exaggeration. I've had basically the exact same interaction with 3 different specific women that I was once friends with over simply the notion of whether men's rights advocates had good arguments at all or not. As soon as I mentioned a few issues that men and boys faced, they freaked out and blocked me. Some of which calling me a Meninist, which literally does not exist. Precisely, nobody literally identifies as a Meninist, and that is plain and easy to find if any of these feminists bothered to actually Google the term. It was a satirical term that, like most memes, is hard to accurately trace in origin, but I'm fairly certain is usually just used to mock feminists by somewhat showing them the mirror of how insane they behave and giving an example of what it would look like if men were to say similar things about men. What would the core principles of Meninism actually be? I can't even stretch my brain to come up with some. There's actually a pretty funny article on reductress.com, which is a satire site that is pretty funny, which is about somebody considering themselves an intersectional Meninist. And they basically talk about how all they care about are the issues of men, but all men, every man, but as long as they're men, which is basically what intersectional feminists do, but with women. The super hilarious part was that some intersectional feminist friends of mine shared it on Facebook. Like, I don't think they understood that 1, Meninism literally doesn't exist, and 2, that they were the ones being made fun of in the article. It was satire that was above their head. If you haven't already heard, feminism is really nothing more than an ideology. Sure, it is also a business, has major political ties and various frameworks throughout certain governments, but it is not inherently synonymous with women's rights, and in certain instances, one could easily make the argument that feminism is fighting against certain women's rights. The simplest being that feminists often refer to self-defense as victim blaming now. It's kind of strange. Also, case in point, Cassie J, the filmmaker of this documentary, The Red Pill, that I mentioned earlier, is being smeared and protested by feminists, some of whom are men who have said a bunch of particularly nasty and untrue things about her. And all she's trying to do is put her film in theaters as a female director, technically. Granted, she sympathizes with men's rights advocates and activists, but it doesn't make her a bad person. I don't even think they've seen it. The people who are trying to organize the boycotts of it, of course. I've said it in other videos and I will say it again. Feminism is basically a useless term. If it were abolished from the dictionaries tomorrow, we could get along just fine. People who specifically spend their time advocating and fighting for the gender-specific issues of women and girls could call themselves women's rights activists like the men do. Hell, I wouldn't mind calling myself a women's rights advocate because I do sometimes speak about issues like reproductive rights. Now, I don't throw around the label of MRA in reference to myself for a few reasons, and I want to make those clear. I am not a men's rights activist because the only thing I really do in regards to the men's rights movement is talk about it online in my videos and on social media. However, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a men's rights advocate, because I do advocate for the rights and fair treatment of men and boys. So technically, since advocate and activist both start with the letter A, I would be an MRA if you had to say so. Still, I have had some differences of opinion with certain members of the tribe who really rubbed me the wrong way, which reminded me why I usually avoid labels at all costs. Namely, when I talked about the fact that feminists were smearing the gay male community with accusations that homosexual men frequently sexually assault women at gay bars, I tried to explain to a certain group of MRAs that it is simply untrue, and that the only touching that goes on is playful stuff that nobody should consider sexual assault, like a joking ass slap that nobody thought twice about, like it usually happened both ways. I figured the playful environment that develops between gay men and women at gay bars where everybody is drunk and not uptight about such touching would be something that these guys could understand. But apparently I thought wrong. Many people's response was to tell me that this was technically sexual assault, even if it was from a gay man to a straight woman as a joke. A joke that, mind you, the women I have been around have literally never cared about. I tried to explain to these supposed MRAs who had seemingly never really spent time in a gay bar that women touch gay men constantly. Which is why, once in a blue moon, gay men feel it's okay to slap their friend's ass as a joke. What was their solution? To call the cops on the women. Seriously. My solution was clearly for everybody to relax and have fun at the gay bar like normal people. But certain MRAs told me that gay men should start pressing charges or getting the girls kicked out for slapping our asses, as if all of a sudden we are supposed to care. Their solution to this ridiculous double standard that the feminists were trying to impose on gay men and saying that we were sexually assaulting them was to create even more authoritarianism and rules. Because, well, one of the big talking points for some MRAs is females getting away with sexually abusing and raping men, which maybe that's legitimate. But in this case, we really don't care. So even though I don't care that girls slap my ass on occasion, they wanted me to start caring if I were to consider myself a proper MRA or whatever. It was in that moment where I realized that I couldn't fully take on the label of MRA. But still, I do advocate for the rights of men and boys, and women and girls, but I'm not a Meninist, and nobody is. While maybe a few of the men's rights advocates I have come across are a bit wacky and try to pressure a certain element of groupthink that I was personally uncomfortable with in that one situation, it is nowhere near the scope and ridiculousness that is fourth wave intersectional feminism. In a conversation recently with a fourth wave feminist that I had online, she accused me of sounding like a Christian homophobe bigot with the way that I criticized feminism. My response was the obvious: one can change being a feminist as it is a frame of mind, but one cannot change being homosexual. Her response was at least 500 words long and went into how incredibly important feminism was to her, and she basically ended up trying to say that her state of self-identifying as a feminist was no more pliable than my sexual orientation as a gay man. I don't remember what I said at that point. I might have been too busy face-palming myself to sleep while listening to Madonna ballads to say anything. If MRAs acted anywhere near to the way that woman and other feminists behave, we could begin to call it Meninism. But until then, all you're doing when you say this ridiculous term is proving your own ignorance about gender issues in general, proving your own ignorance about feminism itself if you think that it is comparable to MRAs, and certainly you're proving your own ignorance about the men's movement. Have a good night and stay tuned.